You say you're tired of the relationship. But what if you're just tired of constantly folding yourself into something that doesn't fit? There's something gnawing at you, isn't there? A quiet exhaustion that has nothing to do with her morning coffee, ritual, or the way she leaves dishes in the sink. It's deeper than that. It's the weight of wearing a mask that's become too heavy to carry. What if I told you that you're not tired of her, but of betraying yourself to keep her? What if the relationship isn't the problem? What if the problem is how much of yourself you've traded away in the name of love? Carl Jung once observed that we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Right now, we're going to make something very dark conscious. The slow, silent death of your authentic self. Do you remember who you were before? Before you learned to apologize for having opinions. Before you started editing your thoughts to match her comfort zone. There was a time when you moved through the world with a certain presence. Your no meant something. Your silence held weight. You didn't need to explain your boundaries because you lived them. But somewhere along the way, you traded that man for someone more understanding, more reasonable, more humble. Someone who wouldn't rock the boat, who would smooth over every conflict before it could disturb the peace. Jung called this the shadow of the pleasing self. Watch how it operates. You always apologize first, even when you've done nothing wrong. You've become a professional diffuser of emotional landmines, not just your own, but everyone else's. You've learned to exchange your boundaries for the illusion of harmony. And now you're exhausted. Not from loving her, but from pretending to be someone who doesn't exist. Jung warned us. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But today, we face it, because your soul is tired of the charade. Section 1. The Architecture of Self-betrayal. Let me paint you a picture of how this betrayal looks in practice. It's not dramatic. It's in the small moments, the daily surrenders that feel like kindness but taste like death. You've forgotten how to say no without a dissertation explaining why. When she asks you to do something that violates your inner rhythm, you don't refuse. You rationalize. You don't set boundaries. You negotiate with your own integrity. You smile when you're dying inside because her comfort has become more important than your truth. You've become the eternal translator between what you feel and what you think she can handle. You filter your authentic responses through the question, will this upset her? And slowly, methodically, you've trained her not to see you. Because how can she see someone who refuses to show up as himself? At some point, she stopped seeing you, but it wasn't her fault. You stopped showing up as yourself. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to be socially acceptable. But you've worn your mask so long, it's fused to your face. You've forgotten where the performance ends and the real man begins. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the expectations and projections of others. But you've been doing the opposite. You've been de-individuating, dissolving into what you think love requires. The man she fell in love with, he had edges, he had mystery, he had a center of gravity that didn't shift with every emotional weather pattern. He was unpredictable in the best way. Not chaotic, but authentic. Where is he now? He's buried under layers of yes dear and whatever you think is best. And I just want you to be happy. Noble sentiments that have become the tombstone of your genuine self. Section 2. The Story of the Hollow. Here let me tell you about Marcus. 36 years old, successful architect, devoted boyfriend of 3 years. On paper, Marcus was everything a modern man should be. Emotionally available, conflict-averse, endlessly accommodating. Marcus had learned to read her moods like weather patterns. A slight frown meant he should suggest ordering her favorite takeout. A quiet evening meant she needed space to process something she wouldn't tell him about. Silence meant he should initiate one of those difficult conversations about where they stood. Every day became a careful dance around her emotional landscape. He developed an almost supernatural ability to sense her needs before she expressed them. He became the perfect boyfriend, anticipating, accommodating, adapting. But here's what Marcus didn't realize he was doing. He was training her to see him as an extension of her own emotional system, rather than as a separate, autonomous human being with his own inner world. He stopped seeing his friends because she felt excluded when he had experiences that didn't include her. Not because she explicitly asked him to. She was too sophisticated for that. Instead, she would get quiet after his guys' nights, make subtle comments about feeling left out, create just enough emotional tension that it became easier to simply stop going. He gave up his Saturday morning runs because she wanted to spend weekends together. Again, not through direct confrontation, but through the slow erosion of guilt and the gentle manipulation of his desire to make her happy. He abandoned his dream of starting his own firm because it felt selfish to pursue something that might take time and energy away from their relationship. She never said he couldn't pursue his dreams. She was far too enlightened for such obvious control. Instead, she would express concern about the financial risk, worry about the time commitment, question whether it was really worth the stress. Marcus even changed the way he decorated his apartment, the music he listened to, the books he read, everything filtered through the question, will this fit with the life we're building together? But somewhere along the way, we became she, and together became whatever keeps her happy. He started censoring his thoughts before he spoke them, not because she was critical, but because he had learned to anticipate what would create emotional labor for her. He became a master of preemptive accommodation. His own emotions became secondary, then tertiary, then practically invisible. When he felt frustrated, he would analyze whether his frustration was valid or if he was being unreasonable. When he felt sad, he would wonder if his sadness was an inconvenience to her happiness. When he felt angry, he would immediately begin the process of talking himself out of it. Marcus lived in a constant state of emotional self-surveillance, monitoring his own inner world through the lens of how it might affect her. And then, one day, after 3 years of this dance, she said the words that shattered everything. "I don't feel like I know who you are anymore. You're like a ghost of the man I met." The irony was devastating. In trying to become everything she needed, he had become nothing she could love. But here's the deeper tragedy. Marcus had become nothing he could love either. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a stranger, a man who had spent so long performing the role of good boyfriend that he had forgotten what his authentic self even looked like. Marcus represents what Jung called the hollow hero, seemingly strong, seemingly stable, but empty because he's living so far from his authentic self that even his virtues become vices. His kindness became people-pleasing. His flexibility became spinelessness. His love became desperation. His generosity became self-abandonment. His empathy became emotional codependency. His commitment became a prison he had built with his own hands. Jung understood this paradox. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But Marcus, like so many men, had spent years becoming who he thought she needed him to be. The tragedy wasn't that she stopped loving him. The tragedy was that he had stopped being someone worth loving, including by himself. When he looked in the mirror, He saw a stranger performing the role of good boyfriend with increasing desperation and decreasing authenticity. This is the shadow side of modern masculinity. The belief that love is earned through self-erasure, that devotion means disappearing, that being a good man means having no needs, no boundaries, no authentic self that might occasionally be inconvenient. We've been taught that masculine strength means never needing anything, never expressing vulnerability, never asking for support. But we've also been taught that modern evolved masculinity means being endlessly accommodating, emotionally available at all times, and willing to sacrifice our own needs for the comfort of others. These contradictory demands create men like Marcus, strong enough to carry everyone else's emotional weight, but hollow enough to have no center of their own to stand on. But Jung knew better. He understood that love without individuation is not love at all. It's a form of mutual consumption that devours both people involved. Real love, Jung believed, can only exist between two individuated beings, two people who know who they are, what they want, what they need, and what they will and won't accept. Everything else is just elaborate performance. Here's the truth that cuts to the bone. You're not mourning the end of love. You're mourning the death of the man you used to be. You don't miss her. You miss the man you were before you shrunk yourself to keep her comfortable. You miss the version of yourself who had opinions that weren't focus grouped through her emotional reactions. You miss the man who could be alone without feeling incomplete. Let me be specific about what you've lost, because this grief is real and it deserves to be named. You've lost the man who could walk into a room and command natural respect without saying a word. The man whose presence was felt, whose silence had weight, whose rare words carried authority because they came from a place of authenticity rather than anxiety. You've lost the man who knew his own mind and wasn't afraid to speak it. The man who could disagree without it becoming a relationship crisis, who could express disappointment without having to manage everyone else's emotional response to his feelings. You've lost the man who had his own internal compass, who didn't need external validation to know which direction to walk. The man who made decisions based on his own values rather than on what would keep the peace. You're tired of pretending that you're okay with things that violate your soul. You're exhausted from holding on to a love that no longer gives you space to breathe, to grow, to be gloriously, messily, authentically real. Every day, you swallow a little more of yourself. Every conversation, you edit your truth a little more heavily. Every conflict, you give up a little more ground until you're standing on nothing but the desire to not upset anyone. You didn't lose her love. You lost your reflection. When you look in the mirror now, do you see a man? Or do you see a carefully constructed performance of what you think a good man should be? This is what Jung called the death of the ego, but not in the spiritual sense. This is the death of your authentic self, your genuine identity, your real desires and needs and boundaries. This death doesn't lead to enlightenment. It leads to a kind of living death where you're alive, but not really living. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your unconscious mind has been screaming at you for months, maybe years. It's been sending you signals that through that quiet desperation, that growing resentment, that feeling of being trapped in a life that looks perfect from the outside but feels like slow suffocation from the inside. It's been telling you something is wrong through your inability to feel excited about things that used to light you up. Through your growing irritability at small things that shouldn't matter but somehow feel like the last straw. Through your dreams where you're often running, escaping, or searching for something you can never quite find. but you've been calling it relationship challenges, or growing pains, or the normal struggles of commitment. You've been pathologizing your soul's rebellion against its own betrayal. Here's what your unconscious knows that your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. You're not in love anymore. You're in a pattern. You're not building a life together. You're managing a system designed to avoid authentic connection. What if your exhaustion isn't about her at all? What if your longing isn't for her affection, but for your own integrity? What if that ache in your chest isn't missing her, but missing yourself? What if the peace you're seeking isn't in fixing the relationship, but in remembering who you are when no one is watching, when no one needs you to be anything other than exactly what you are? Because here's what Jung knew that modern psychology refuses to acknowledge. A man cannot love authentically until he learns to be authentic. You cannot give what you do not possess. And you cannot possess yourself while constantly performing for someone else's approval. The shadow you've been running from isn't your anger, your selfishness, or your independence. The shadow you've been running from is your own soul, demanding to be heard, to be honored, to be lived. This is why you feel so tired, not because love is exhausting, but because pretending is. Not because relationships are hard, but because betraying yourself is the hardest thing a human being can do. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you smile when you want to scream, every time you accommodate when you should advocate, you create a little tear in the fabric of your authentic self. And now those tears have become a gaping wound. The man who could walk into a room and command respect without saying a word. Where is he, the man who knew his own mind and wasn't afraid to speak it? What happened to him? The man who was complete before he met her, who brought wholeness to the relationship instead of looking for her to complete him. Can you even remember who that was? Jung understood that this crisis isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough trying to happen. Your soul is trying to break free from the prison you've built around it in the name of love. Stop running from this truth. It's time to listen to what your soul has been trying to tell you. If you're resonating with this message, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is help each other remember who we really are. Here's where we step out of the victim's chair and into the throne of personal responsibility. Because here's what Jung would tell you. Don't resent her for being what she is. Resent yourself for betraying what you are. She's not the villain in this story. She's just a woman responding to the energy you've been projecting. When you show up as a man who needs her approval to feel whole, she'll treat you like someone who needs her approval to feel whole. Don't leave her. Leave the version of yourself that never felt enough. Jung called it emotional sovereignty. Though he used different words. This is about emotional autonomy. About not being a slave to the need to be loved, accepted, or validated by anyone outside yourself. Here's what emotional sovereignty looks like. You love because you choose to, not because you need to. You give because you're full, not because you're empty. You stay because you want to build something beautiful together, not because you're terrified of being alone. Jung understood something profound. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But terror is just the doorway to freedom. Every morning for the next week, before you interact with her, ask yourself, what would I do today if I knew I was already enough? Then do one thing from that space, however small. When did I last say no without explaining myself? What parts of my authentic self have I hidden to keep peace? If I loved myself the way I love her, how would I treat myself differently? The integrated man, Jung's ideal, doesn't run from love, but he doesn't depend on it to define his worth. He walks steady in his own truth, and if love is deep enough, strong enough, real enough, it walks with him. I want to paint you a different picture now. A picture of what becomes possible when you come home to yourself. The integrated man, this is Jung's vision of psychological wholeness, doesn't wage war against the feminine. He doesn't run from love or build walls around his heart. But he also doesn't sacrifice his essence for anyone's comfort, including his own. This man knows something most men have forgotten. You can love deeply without losing yourself. You can be devoted without being dependent. You can be tender without being weak. You can be committed without being consumed. Let love be a choice, not a cage. Let her presence be sacred, not salvation. This man doesn't need her to complete him because he was never incomplete. He doesn't need her to save him because he was never drowning. He doesn't need her to validate him because his worth doesn't depend on external confirmation. And paradoxically, this is exactly the kind of man a woman can't help but respect, admire, and yes, love deeply. Remember Marcus. 6 months after that devastating conversation, something shifted. He didn't leave her. He didn't become cold, or distant, or emotionally unavailable. But he stopped apologizing for existing. The change didn't happen overnight. It began with small acts of self-respect that felt revolutionary after years of self-abandonment. He started his Saturday runs again, not as rebellion, but as self-respect. When she mentioned feeling left out, he acknowledged her feelings without taking responsibility for fixing them. "I understand you feel that way," he said simply. "These runs are important to me." He began speaking his truth gently but firmly, without the desperate need for her to agree with it. When they disagreed about something, he stopped the old pattern of arguing until she felt heard, and he felt exhausted. Instead, he learned to say, "I see it differently, and that's okay." He stopped managing her emotions and started honoring his own. When she was upset about something at work, instead of immediately jumping into fix-it mode, he learned to say, "That sounds frustrating. What kind of support would be helpful right now?" Sometimes the answer was just listening. Sometimes it was problem-solving. Sometimes it was space. But he stopped assuming that her emotional state was automatically his responsibility to manage. He reconnected with old friends, not to spite her, but because friendship was part of who he was. He started having conversations that didn't include her, experiences that existed independent of their relationship. He remembered what it felt like to be Marcus the friend. Marcus, the individual, not just Marcus the boyfriend. He pursued his architectural dreams, not because he didn't love her, but because loving her didn't mean abandoning himself. He started his firm, working long hours and taking financial risks. When she expressed anxiety about the uncertainty, he listened, reassured her when appropriate, but didn't let her fears dictate his choices. Most importantly, he started saying no. Not rudely, not defensively, but clearly and without extensive justification. "No, I don't want to do that. No, that doesn't work for me. No, I have other plans." And something beautiful happened. She didn't leave him for being more himself. She fell in love with him all over again. Because finally, there was someone there to love. Finally, there was a man present instead of a performance. "I feel like I'm meeting you for the first time," she told him one evening as they sat on the couch, each reading their own books, comfortable in shared silence. "Where have you been?" He smiled, understanding now what Jung meant about the privilege of becoming who you truly are. "I've been here all along," he said. "I just forgot how to show up." The relationship didn't become perfect. They still disagreed, still had conflicts, still navigated the ordinary challenges that come with two individuals building a life together. but the conflicts became clean instead of tangled, direct instead of manipulative, resolvable instead of endless. Because when two authentic people disagree, they're disagreeing about specific things, not about the right to exist as they are. She began to respect him in ways she never had when he was constantly accommodating. She started asking for his opinion because she knew it would be genuine rather than calculated. She started trusting his decisions because they came from a solid center rather than from anxiety about her approval. Most surprisingly to Marcus, she became more feminine in his presence, not in a regressive way, but in a natural way. When he stopped trying to occupy the emotional space of both people in the relationship, she had room to be fully herself too. This is the promise that awaits you on the other side of self-betrayal. Not the end of love, but the beginning of love that doesn't require you to disappear. Love between two authentic people feels completely different from love between a performance and a projection. It feels solid instead of fragile, exciting instead of draining, expansive instead of constricting. You don't need to leave her to find peace. You just need to come home to yourself. The relationship you're exhausted with isn't the one you have with her. It's the one you have with the stranger in the mirror. The man who gave up his authentic self for the promise of being loved. But here's the twist Jung understood. The promise was always false. Love earned through self-abandonment isn't love at all. It's pity, convenience, or habit dressed up in romantic language. Real love, the kind that endures, that transforms, that elevates both people, can only exist between two authentic individuals who choose each other not out of need, but out of genuine appreciation for who the other person actually is. When you show up as yourself, the real, unedited, sometimes inconvenient version of yourself, you give her the opportunity to love someone real instead of someone imaginary. You give the relationship a chance to be based on truth instead of performance. Some women won't be able to handle your authenticity. They've become accustomed to the accommodating version of you, and they'll resist the change. They may test you harder, create more drama, threaten to leave. Let them. The woman who can't love the real you was never loving you anyway. She was loving her projection, her fantasy, her idea of who you should be. That's not love. That's elaborate fantasy management. But the woman who can meet your authenticity with her own, who can respect your boundaries while maintaining her own, who can love you not despite your individuality, but because of it, that woman is worth becoming your real self for. Jung's final wisdom echoes through the centuries. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. It's time to wake up, not from love, but to it. Real love, the kind that doesn't require you to disappear in order to appear worthy. She doesn't want your performance. She wants your presence. She doesn't want your apologies for being human. She wants your authenticity, even when it's inconvenient. She doesn't want your shadow, hidden and shameful. She wants your light, the light that only shines when you stop hiding from yourself. The man you were before you learned to betray yourself. He's still there. He's been waiting patiently while you played the role of the perfect boyfriend. He's tired of the costume you've been wearing, tired of the script you've been reading, tired of the life you've been performing instead of living. He's ready to come home. He's ready to take his rightful place in your life, in your relationship, in your soul. Come home to him. Come home to yourself. The relationship will either rise to meet your authenticity, or it will fall away to make room for something real. Either way, you win, because you get to be you again. You get to wake up in the morning without putting on a mask. You get to love without losing yourself. You get to be in relationship without being in prison. And that, my friend, is the only victory worth having. The journey back to yourself isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Because on the other side of self-betrayal lies something precious. The chance to love and be loved for who you actually are. This is Jung's ultimate promise that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. Not who others need you to be, not who you think you should be, but who you actually are underneath all the performance and accommodation and fear. That man is still there. He's been waiting, and it's time to let him come home. Subscribe if this message found you where you needed to be found. Share it with the men in your life who might be performing when they could be living. And remember, you don't need permission to be yourself. You just need the courage to stop being someone else. The journey home to yourself begins now. And she, if she's the right woman, will thank you for having the courage to take it. Because authentic love can only exist between authentic people. Until next time, everything else is just elaborate performance art, masquerading as intimacy.